Why do you love dog health and nutrition so much?
Because I just think it's a crucial part of caring for your dog. It's sort of overlooked a bit sometimes. It can work as preventative and it can work as integrative health. I find is sort of a combination between a science and an art.
There are millions of options out there.
Yeah.
Which one do I need to follow that is actually really gonna truly help my dog thrive?
There's so much of an emphasis on marketing from some brands, and it creates a lot of confusion. People really want the best for their dog, so these marketing tactics really attack that. And obviously, you want the best for your dog, so you want to believe who you think is an expert, but not necessarily they are, right? Just because something works for somebody doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody, and sometimes it may not on paper be the best option, but it might be the best for the owner and their dog.
Welcome to the DAFY podcast, the place where you will get expert-led and science-backed advice on dog health and nutrition. No more confusion and no more conflicting opinions. Just clear guidance to help you make informed decisions for your pup. Because when it comes to our dogs, they deserve the very best care. And we, as dog parents, deserve confidence in the choices we make for them. Let's meet an expert.
Mikaela, welcome to the DAFY podcast. It's so great to have you on.
Yeah, it's nice to be here.
I'm really excited about today's conversation. I think it's a really like a hot topic right now. And I think the listeners are really going to enjoy hearing your experience and your point of view on this topic.
Yeah, I hope so.
Amazing. So look, to start, what I wanted to ask you is, why do you love dog health and nutrition so much?
Because I just think it's a crucial part of caring for your dog, and it's something that the owners can do at home. I think it's sort of overlooked a bit sometimes. People, it can work as preventative and it can work as integrative health, where if your dog is sick, you can kind of tweak their diet to help them, or you can have a specific diet to prevent certain illnesses. And I just think it's really interesting because it's kind of like nutrition. I find is sort of a combination between a science and an art almost, because there's so many different, it's all evidence-based, but there's so many different opportunities that you have to kind of make different diets, or, there's so much scientific progress as well right now. So it's really interesting. I think it's going to be big. It is big now, but I think it's going to be even bigger, in the next 10 to 20 years. I think it's growing steadily.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely see that right now. And I think as part of the growth, I think that's when all the confusion as well comes into that, because, you just have so many different information, so many layers to it. And as a dog owner, you're all the time thinking, okay, there are millions of options out there.
Yeah.
Which one do I need to follow that is actually really gonna truly help my dog thrive, right? So if I put myself into a kind of a dog owner's perspective, either it's a new dog owner or is an owner of a dog that is planning to change their food, or a senior dog needing a change in diet. Why do you think there is so much confusion when it comes to, pet nutrition in your experience?
Because I think that there's so much of an emphasis on marketing from some brands, and it creates a lot of confusion where they sort of leave the scientific realm and they enter this pseudoscience almost campaign against it. And it causes a lot of confusion because a lot of the claims that they make are really, catching. People really want the best for their dog. So these campaigns or these marketing tactics really attack that, I guess. And kind of, and obviously, you want the best for your dog. So you want to believe who you think is an expert, but not necessarily they are, right? So I think that's why there's so much information out there, and there's so many different choices as well. Just because something works for somebody doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody. And that's an important part to consider. In my role as a canine nutritionist, is that there are a lot of options and you need to consider all the options. And sometimes it may not on paper be the best option, but it might be the best for the owner and their dog, right? Yeah. It's a bit of an art that way, I find. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think as well is the fact that, it's like you said, right? There are so many options. There are so many different voices. You have, dog nutritionists, you have vet nutritionists, you have people that have just come out of university that have kind of like a
Mm-hmm.
fresh mindset. So it's
Mm-hmm.
just like, there is so much advice out there. And I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
some of it is good. And I love the fact that you say every dog is different, because I think that's a huge, huge factor in
Yeah.
choosing the right diet for your dog. But what are the things, like I'm a dog owner and I want to change my dog's diet, right? Where do I start?
So I think the first place to start is even just outside of focusing on the dog, it's like focusing on finding a reputable company or a reputable
Mhm.
brand. So you need to, like, that's where I start anyways with clients, is I start on finding a reputable company, and I sort of have like a list that I work through. So I'll
Mhm.
ask, like, does the company employ a nutritionist who's like qualified? So either a veterinary nutritionist, somebody with a PhD, or even a veterinarian with a master's or a PhD. That's who I'll consider, like, like somebody who has science on their side, right? Like,
Yes.
and a company that's willing to give the credentials and the information about the people that they're employing, I like. And then alongside that, I also like to ask who's formulating the diet, because just because, like, for example, somebody can have a PhD in animal nutrition, but they may not necessarily understand like formulating for a processed diet, because once you process,
Interesting.
the undergo processing, it can change the way the nutrients are getting uptaked, right? So
Yes.
yeah, so ideally I would like a company that has like a team of people. That's generally the best, because you need different kind of bright minds to work in this field.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's where I'd start. And then you get into like, do they do like digestibility testing or any other testing on the product? The nutrient analysis, I'll ask if they're doing it by database or if they're doing a final product chemical analysis, and just like a list that
Yeah.
I'll send out
Yeah.
an email and I'll go through it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Because I
yeah.
think it's good. We can share that with the audience, right? From your
Hmm.
perspective, who you are, like, an expert, you do
Yeah.
that every single day, like as a job, is, like what are the things, like normal, like dog owners, what they would do, they will go onto the website, they might message the company and things like that. It's like, what is the checklist? And we can put it in the show
Hmm.
notes as well. And
Sure.
maybe we can put it as a PDF and share it with people. But that's
Yeah.
amazing. I think that's good to have
Yeah.
that, basically.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, it's sort of similar to what the WSAVA does, where like it's kind of based off of that, but I'll go into like asking further questions, just because I want a company that's transparent, right? And so I don't want like them to make a claim where, oh, well, we work with a bunch of experts, but then not actually tell me who the experts are or their credentials, right? So yeah, like I said, I'll ask like who they're working with, and then if they're doing any testing, about the nutrient testing, if they can send me a final product chemical analysis. And ideally, I'd like one that's energy based, so like grams per kilojoules or kilojoules per grams, and an
I say,
asbestos.
if I was a dog owner, sorry to interrupt you, what
Yeah,
is
no.
that product analysis?
So ideally, they'll send me something that's gone through another, like a third party lab. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's generally the way it is. And
Yeah.
it will include a complete analysis of all the essential chemicals. So they'll include all the amino acids, all the minerals and vitamins, and a lot of them include the fatty acids as well. Sometimes they'll even include non-essential amino acids or non-essential nutrients or conditionally
Mm-hmm.
essential nutrients. Like sometimes they'll include vitamin C, and some companies even include taurine, which I really like because taurine's a really hot topic in pet nutrition right now, right? That's sort of what it will include, and they'll generally have it per 100 grams, or they'll have it as on an energy basis. Good companies will send you both.
Yes.
I
Yes.
don't want anything with percentages. I prefer it on an energy basis for sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I want to know how they get these values, right? So if it's actually just by like using a nutrient database, or if they're actually sending the product off, and this is like a real analysis and really representing their product. And then prior to that, I'd like to know what the safety standards and quality control is, right? So a good company will have their facility a good manufacturer will have the facility regularly inspected, and I want to see like generally a detailed information about it. So what are their procedures for selecting ingredient suppliers? Are they checking the quality of the raw materials coming in? And are they checking like a physical inspection of it, like microbial inspection, and then obviously like nutrient testing on them? And then like what else are their quality control measures? Like, are they working with other facilities to test them?
Yes.
Sorry, I was just trying to find the word. Yeah.
That's all right.
Yeah. And then, and a lot of companies will say on their website, they follow quality control measures, and they'll show like the certificates that they pass and stuff. And so that's like a good place to start. But a lot of time to get more information, you do have to contact them, which is fine. I understand that not everything's going to be on the website, and that's where, my role comes in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I avoid companies that will say that they have extensive quality control, but then won't provide any of the information. Because I just find I prefer a very transparent company. And I think,
Yes.
yeah. So, and to go with that, I prefer to say that quality control, I think a lot of people immediately think, oh, like I don't want a company that has recalls, right? And I try to explain to people that a recall isn't necessarily a terrible thing, because there are different types of recalls, right? Like there's an involuntary recall and a voluntary recall. So you prefer a company that undergoes voluntary recalls than involuntary recalls. So you need to consider how like the manufacturer is handling the recall. So are they fighting the recall, saying this isn't true and still sending the products out? Or are they making sure every single product that should be recalled is back in stock, refunding pet owners, and then doing internal like testing and investigation to find out what the source of the problem was? That's kind of what I like to see. So I think there's a lot of stigma around recall where people go, oh, you want a brand that has no recall. And then that's not true, because realistically, a lot of brands have been around for like ever, right? Like 20
Absolutely.
to
You
50
go
years.
now, even
Yeah.
our food, right? Like you go on,
Yeah.
we have a website in the UK,
Mhm.
you have one in the US, and it's the same
Yeah.
thing, isn't it? Like you actually want to see that product being recalled before it gets out to many
Exactly.
people, right? Like you say, if a company just straight away notices that and actually take some actions, that should
Yeah.
be seen as a positive sign.
Exactly.
They made a mistake. They're trying to repair it as soon as possible.
Yeah, I find that really reassuring, because then like they value the customers. Like they don't want to send a faulty product out, for sure, right? Yeah, and since companies have been around for so long, they're obviously going to have recalls. I would prefer to see a company that's been around for like 60 years and acknowledge that they've had recalls, than a company that's been around that long and say, oh, we've never had a recall, because then you're thinking, well, obviously something's probably gone wrong. Like it's not a perfect world. Stuff will happen.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I like to see when it comes to quality control and just like good companies. Yeah, I'm trying to think what else. Are they like supportive of scientific progress, right? Like just as somebody with a master's, I think that's really important. I don't this is a lot to ask, because I do understand that research is very expensive and funding research can be very expensive, right? So I understand that if they can't do their own research, only select companies can afford to do that. But if they're privately funding, or if they're funding research like in institutions, alongside other companies or like the government, I love that. I think that that's really good, because nutrition is a science, like I said. And so even if they're just supportive of scientific progress, I find that's enough for me. And so I'll avoid companies that don't conduct any like internal product research, so like the nutrient testing and stuff, but they'll promote like pseudoscience or openly like have a distrust against corporations or veterinarians or something. I just find that that's not really productive and sort of, undermines what nutrition really is.
Yeah,
and that I'll just tend to avoid that. I'm not make a recommendation for a client to use that company. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And I think this is so important what you just said, because, there are loads of fresh feeding advocates coming along in the last, 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
And there is a big evolution from, advocating for fresh food versus or raw food versus kibble.
Yeah.
And I think when I see companies that, especially here in the UK, they're small, fair enough. There are not that many fundings. I'm not a big name. I'm a small company, but I can see that they're actually doing not just, kind of like getting the user feedback, but also, yes, you're absolutely right, is what else can we do to
Mhm.
say actually fresh food is better. And if you say, okay, you need to feed your dog raw food, why is that? Give me some research that tells me
Yeah,
raw food is
exactly.
better. And whether it's a feeding trial, I know they're really expensive, but we have
Yeah.
to be able to prove and make people feel confident that
Mhm.
fresh food is better. But I think over the years, hopefully, we're going to see a little bit more.
Yeah. Like I'd love to see more research on fresh food. Like I think that's
Mm.
something people kind of, because I say I'm evidence-based, people expect me to be completely against fresh food or raw food. But ultimately I, you know, I've come to the conclusion that pet owners are generally pretty smart people and they want the best for their pets, right? And if they think, if they're really set on that's the way and they can follow a specific recipe and it's complete and balanced and following the NRC or AFCO or guidelines, I have no problem with that. Like there's obviously benefits and then there's negatives. And I think if they're just being safe and, you know, I have no problem with that. Like,
Yes,
you know, as long as they're
absolutely.
avoiding nutrient deficiencies or contamination, I think that it's, you know, it's a way to go. And obviously,
Yes.
you know, 10 or 20 years down the line, if there is research that says, oh, you know, fresh food actually is really amazing. And you know,
Yeah.
we can see obviously that there is a potential for it to be really great. I
Yeah.
think that would be great to see. I'm nervous that a lot of people are going to be like, we told you, like the fresh food and raw community. But I think that they kind of forget how open-minded scientists or academics are. Like, I think that academics will see that and be like, oh, okay, so, you know, this is just the way that science is progressing. We've realized now that, you know, this might be potentially a better way. And, you know, I look forward to seeing that. I love reading new research that talks about fresh food, or even like when there's specific research that looks just at like ingredients, use of novel ingredients. I think that's really exciting because there's a lot of potential for, you know, pet foods and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously you're like, you know, you just kind of like not just finish your studies, but you're kind of fresh out of uni compared to a
Yeah.
vet that's been in practice for like 20 years and he's kind of
Mhm.
always been used to recommend the same food based on their studies that they did at the time. You know, do you have any kind of research and things like that you've seen that is coming up that you think is going to be quite exciting for people to know about?
Let me think. I was just reading something. It's mostly about senior feed, how we might need to kind of update the nutrient guidelines for senior dogs and consider what a senior dog is. I think that that's really interesting because there isn't legally, they're not required to have a complete and balanced life stage for seniors, right? It's not a thing yet. It probably will be one day because dogs and cats are living a very long time now, right? So there's more seniors. That research on senior dogs and senior cats is really interesting because it's a quality of life thing. And I think that that's really interesting. Yeah. Instead of just having them on the same like adult kibble their whole life until they're, you know, really old. I think having certain ingredients or fatty acids or supplements is like there's a lot of potential there, and I think that that's really cool.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love that because with I resonate, Rusty's going to be 60 this year. And I am like, in my head, I'm like, what can I do? Is there anything else I should be doing? You know, I'm like blood tests all the time, making sure there's nothing wrong with him. But you're absolutely right. It's like when we get older, you know, our nutrient requirements change. And it's the same for like puppies or, you know, lactating or pregnant doggies, right? It's the same thing, isn't it? Their requirements, I find that very fascinating because it's like we just assume they should be on the same food all their life. And I reckon a lot of people, right, who breed dogs as well are the same, right? It's just like, same food. Like there are not that many people that actually spend the time doing the research unless you're a really reputable breeder, because that is actually going to change how the puppies are going to, you know, grow. So I find it really fascinating.
That's, you mentioned that like feeding pregnant dogs certain things, and I think that that's something that's really interesting coming out with something called nutrigenetics or nutrigenomics. Have you heard about
Tell me
this?
about that. I have heard of it, but I have not looked into it, so I'd love to hear more.
So it's the idea that you can get genomic testing, or your genome or your genetics can influence your diet, or your diet can influence your genome. So nutrigenomics would be feeding certain diet in utero, so while a female's pregnant, and expecting a different kind of outcome because they would have an influence on gene expression. So like theoretically, they're saying you could feed a certain concentration of fatty acids and then get a certain product in a puppy. So like a healthier puppy, or a puppy with less likely to experience cognitive dysfunction or something like that. And then nutrigenetics is doing genetic testing and then feeding a diet based off of the the genome, right? So for example, this is one, so my friend and I, when we were doing our master's, we actually did do a showcase about nutrigenetics and
Amazing.
nutrigenomics. So that's why I just happened to kind of know about it. For example, you could do genetic testing and then find out that your lab has that gene that can cause obesity, so the POMC gene, and causes them to be excessively hungry. So if you're like, oh, my lab is hungry all the time and my lab won't lose weight, you could theoretically do genetic testing on it and realize, oh, it has this genetic mutation. And so now I need to tailor the diet based off of that. So I give a low fat diet, high in fiber to avoid this, kind of help make them feel more full. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that, because there's going to be a lot of research on it in people, I think, as well. Like, that's not my area of expertise, but I can just see that, it'll be a hot topic, I think, in nutrition across kind of all species. So there's a lot of potential there. I think that that's going to be interesting.
I would love to do another podcast about this, maybe like, I don't know, 6 months time, and kind of like see what you kind of learn, the development that has been, because it's amazing. You're right. I see labs all the time, even when I go on walks with Rusty, and it's just like, everyone is just like, they're just overweight all the time. They just eat too much. They just want food all the time. But actually, you're right. You don't think about that. But it's so fascinating. I love that. Yes, definitely.
It's very cool.
That would be a topic that we can cover in the future.
I think it sort of reaffirms how nutrition is really based in science as well. Because you go, it's all connected to everything, like in the body. It's not just like, there's actually like structure to it. I think when you realize like the connection, that's something that sort of helps people realize like, it's a science.
It's so linked to everything. Yeah. And this is why we have to be so careful when we make choices. And this is why I'm creating that, because I'm such a big advocate of science, but I'm also advocate of, preventative care, which I think a lot of, like people like you are advocate about preventative care. So science doesn't mean that you just focus on reactive care. Science means that you just want to make sure you feel confident that whatever you're recommending to that person, it is the right thing to do for the dog, to make sure that it doesn't cause any harm, really. So just going back to the kind of like when people are trying to choose a dog food, another topic that I hear all the time is ingredient sourcing. So I see loads of different companies that they say, organically sourced or, like locally sourced. What should dog owners be looking for, when it comes to ingredient sourcing in a company?
Ideally, I would like for them to source from the same company where they're manufacturing, like wherever that is. So like a lot of companies, like the big companies, will have manufacturers in specific countries, right? Like I know Hills or Purina or Iams have one in Canada as well as like obviously in the States. And then, so ideally I would like, if they're manufacturing in a specific company, to source their ingredients from a reputable supplier within the same country. Just because it's a little bit easier for them to track back and actually see if something's wrong with the product. I just think, that's something that I'm more comfortable with than overseas shipment and stuff. So I don't know if everybody's like that
as well, right?
Yeah. I don't know if everybody's like that, but I just I think that just something I'm more comfortable with. Yeah.
I completely agree. Any food I choose to recommend to people, I am a big fan of seeing it like British beef, organic or grass-fed, and like sourced in the UK or UK farms, right? And in addition to that, you're supporting as well your country, which I think is really important.
And then it's also more sustainable, I think, as well. Just to source locally, there's like less of a carbon footprint because they're not having to travel as much. Yeah. And I think that that's like a big important issue in pet food, is like the sustainability. When it's just,
I completely agree. I think that's super important. So ideally, locally like sourced from your area. So that's one thing. And then in terms of like a testing, so you mentioned earlier, you said feeding trials, I think lab testing. What is your view on that? Like what is the difference between the two? And
so feeding trials, when they actually feed the dog the diet, generally for a period of time. And I ideally would like for them to actually do like taking a stool sample and then analyzing the stool sample after feeding, and then determining the digestibility of the product. Some companies will also do like blood draws just to do a complete blood panel and serum analysis.
Yes.
Like the bare minimum, I'd be happy with them just doing stool samples. I tend it can be expensive. I understand why not a lot of companies do it. And some companies will be, oh, we do feeding trials. And then you find out that they're not actually doing feeding trials, stability trials only, just to see if dogs like it, which is also important, right? Like you can't just feed and then like not, expect the dog to like it. The dogs may not even like it, right? So yeah,
Absolutely.
I'd like to know like the nutrient losses through digestibility and stuff. Yeah. That's what I'd like to see. Just also knowing like what's in the product. So ideally to do the digestibility trial, they also need to do the laboratory nutrient analysis to actually know what's in the product, right? And then determine how much has been lost through the feces and how much is actually being digested and absorbed. Yeah. Yeah,
So
it's
interesting.
it's
I
important.
That's new for me. I love that. Because obviously I'm not in the lab kind of like area or industry, or I'm not in it. But so it's so it's true, isn't it? So it's like you need to see how much actually of the nutrients they actually keep in our body, right?
Yeah, and
how much.
the research itself is pretty cool. Like there's they use a lot of different, in the methodology in animal nutrition is pretty cool. So I wish that more people would talk about it. Yeah, the kind of stuff that they can do and the way that they determine the certain minerals or the ash content or the protein. Yeah. And people, if you've kind of looked or scanned even through the NRC, you can kind of see like hints of it. But if you go to like the papers that they cite, you can see the the methodology that they did. And I like, just because I've been in science, I think that's pretty cool to see that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I love that. That's amazing. So basically, yes. So that is another part, right? And then the other one is, people are talking a lot about complete and balanced food, right? What does complete and balanced mean?
Yeah, so complete and balanced is used by the pet food industry to signify that the food contains all of the essential nutrients at the levels that meet the animal's target requirements, so that they're able to maintain and avoid diseases produced by deficiencies. So like complete is just meeting the requirements, and balances the relationship between the nutrients. And so you can't just sort of meet all the nutrients. You kind of have to realize that there are relationships between nutrients, right? So you have to take these relationships into consideration because they can compete with each other. They can enhance the end product and stuff like that. And then you can also use these relationships to sort of optimize like just general health, right? So, and the relationship can change based off of like the age, right? So with puppies, you need to like really you're working within tighter margins than with an adult dog. There's a little bit more wiggle room. Like puppies, you need a specific calcium to phosphorus ratio for growth. And then for adults,
especially large
there's a
breeds,
bit more.
right?
Yes, big breeds specifically, yeah. And that's something like when I'm helping people pick foods, you need to actually consider like the life stage and the breed of dog as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then you mentioned, guaranteed analysis, and then you have a full nutritional breakdown, right? So this is a big topic. I hear it all the time. I've been a big follower, as you can see, with Dr. Karen Becker and Rodney Bibb. They were talking about complete nutritional analysis or full nutritional analysis. If I'm a dog owner and I hear the word a guaranteed analysis versus a complete analysis, I'm like, what is that? What like, isn't it the same thing?
Yeah.
What's the difference between the two? Yeah, help us understand and unfold like why we need to kind of learn more about it.
So the guaranteed analysis is what they're in this the pet food industry is like legally has to put on their labels. So it lists the minimum and maximum percentages of specific macronutrients. So it'll be, I think it's minimum of protein and fat, and then a maximum of fiber and moisture, right? So no carbohydrate. Generally, you have to do some math to figure out the carbohydrate. Yeah. And so sometimes they'll have like other nutrients on it, like calcium, a percentage and stuff. That's the main difference. Is the guaranteed analysis isn't necessarily completely accurate, like representative of what's in the product. So that's why I asked for the complete nutrient analysis, so you can actually see everything.
Absolutely.
On an energy basis.
All the amino acids, all the, the actual vitamins, minerals, everything split down. And in my personal experience, when I was listening to their chat and what they were talking about, my biggest thing was, this is so important when you have a dog that suffers with, I don't know, heart problem, liver issue. Because if you have a healthy dog, nothing is wrong. Okay, maybe, but
Yeah.
even then, I still want to trust the company. But when you have, which again resonated to Rusty, a dog with heart problem, I'm very interested to see, for example, the sodium level in that food.
Yes.
Because I know too much sodium they don't kind of excrete sodium in the same way a normal healthy adult dog excretes sodium, right? So that's why I think it's important, if you have a dog with a specific health condition, that's when you really want to like make sure you get that information.
So you can see that way you can sort of also see like the balance aspect. So what's the specific calcium to phosphorus ratio? What's like how much iron, copper, and zinc is in the product? And like you said, for specific conditions like kidney disease and heart disease, you can look at how much sodium, or even with dogs that are prone to getting UTIs. So like the calcium, you can check the calcium level or the purine level for that kind of type of urinary condition. So it's a better insight into the product. So the guaranteed analysis is a good place to start if you know how to convert it into like a way to compare against other products, right? So, but it's not super helpful.
Yeah. Absolutely. And if I'm a dog owner who doesn't have a clue how to read these nutrients, what would you recommend? Like, let's say that, okay, good, I get this list from the company. What do I do with this list?
I would honestly talk to somebody who knows how to read the list.
Okay.
Just like, just ask questions, like somebody who's familiar with looking at the list. And, it takes a while to actually kind of understand what all these numbers mean and stuff. So they'd be better off asking for help from somebody, or maybe even like reaching out to the company and being like, well, why did you add this much? I don't know if the company would be willing to answer.
Or do you have a dog nutritionist in-house that can kind of walk me
Yes.
through?
Okay. That's definitely what I would consider instead of just trying to go it alone.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, no, that's amazing. So look, I love it. I think that will give a dog owner exactly what they kind of like the step by step that they need to take to like really feel confident they have enough information from the food itself, from the sourcing, from the testing part, to actually being able to make that decision. And I have one more question before we go through the DAFY FAQs, which is, and I think so many dog owners, right? I tried to home cook for Rusty when he was a puppy. I used a tool to do that. So where you just put the ingredients and things like that, and then it will tell you. It's actually a tool, US tool, so it's not a UK tool. My question has always been, I add these ingredients. How do I know that? And this is formulating me a recipe based on the FEDIAF guidelines, which is the European guidelines for dog food, and the AAFC or AFCO guidelines. How can I feel confident that what I'm formulating on my own is good? And do you recommend, that actually you still work with a nutritionist when you want to home cook for your dog?
So if you're using something like Balance It, which is like probably one of the best one to use out there, right?
Okay.
I think you can confidently, based off of the end product, so you can select the ingredients and they'll formulate for you. If your dog's healthy and in the prime of life, I think you can confidently follow that. Just take things into consideration, like if your dog's a specific breed that's prone to pancreatitis and stuff, just kind of be careful. I would recommend working with a veterinarian nutritionist or an animal nutritionist who's qualified if your dog has a health condition, or if you're, you need to feed a really specific diet. So if they have allergies or intolerances, that's like when I would generally recommend that. Also, the most important thing is that to realize is that when you're using these formulators, the nutrient database is based off of generally really high quality products, right? Like, and so you have to kind of search out and make sure that, you are buying a good quality product to make sure that they are actually getting all the nutrients, right? Because if you're going to buy, low quality meat, it may not necessarily meet the requirements, right? So
like corn-fed chicken versus, like an organic chicken. Like the difference in nutrients, people don't think about it, and I didn't at the time. I mean, it's kind of like when you actually like, you get told that, you're like, it makes sense, but like straight away, you're like, oh, I'm just going to buy something from the supermarket. And then I was like, oh gosh, I can't really buy a supermarket if I want to make like a raw diet, because, who is telling me that can actually, supermarket sells to humans, not to dogs. So how can I make sure, that this meat is not contaminated and this meat has got all the essential amino acids there, Balance IT or ADF, another tool is got basically in their database. And that's the thing that I found hardest at the time. It was to actually really make sure I could feel confident whatever I was making at home will give him what he needs, versus what you said earlier, going to a company that has done lab testing, fecal samples testing. That makes me feel more confident that actually he's getting what he needs, as long as you've checked and you're confident that
so I've seen that there are a couple companies that are starting to create like fresh food diets, and and they're doing the lab testing and stuff. So I think that that's a good way if somebody wants to feed a fresh food diet. That's a good way to start, because then you kind of can see that they're actually, they are meeting the nutrient requirements. Yeah, instead of just sort of going it alone, unless you're gotten really good at physical inspection and assuming that the product's high quality. It's sort of a gamble that you're taking a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's super, super useful. You're brilliant, by the way. Like, even just talking to you for like 45 minutes, I'm just like, you just learn so much, which is absolutely amazing. I think the listeners really are going to love this episode. So what I wanted to quickly do is called DAFY FAQs. Quick questions that are kind of like the most commonly asked questions about dog nutrition.
Okay.
First question is, what ingredients should I look for in a high quality dog food?
That's a bit of a controversial question, because it's like we just sort of talked about, where people kind of tend to pick on byproducts a little bit, right? And so I think that you can have a really high quality byproduct, right? Like a byproduct that's really nutrient rich. And in comparison, you could have something that just says like chicken meat or chicken breast, and it actually be really low quality.
Yeah.
Right. So I tend to tell people not to focus on the ingredients too much, which seems, like kind of silly, but you have to that's when looking at the quality control measures come in to play, right? Because if they're actually looking at the raw nutrient analysis of the products, then they know that it is a high quality product that they're adding to their food. And so I think people put a little bit too much emphasis on ingredients, unless there's like a specific ingredient that you can't feed, like say you have an allergy to it, or your pet has an intolerance to it or something. That's like the time to kind of look at the ingredients. But I think that there's a little bit too much emphasis on ingredients, and just because something says byproduct on it doesn't mean that it's low quality. Byproducts can be very high quality. They're actually more sustainable because they come out of the human food chain, I guess, food market, right? So it's just like what isn't put into our grocery stores is used in like pet foods, right? So like the organs and stuff. So yeah, I think that there's just too much emphasis on ingredients a little bit. Yeah.
I think as long as you check the company and you really feel confident that their sourcing is great, and that where they're getting the ingredients from, the testing that they're doing and things like that, then
that's how you know.
And you said chicken meal versus byproduct. So you're saying chicken meal is a bit less of a good ingredient?
No, I didn't mean that. Sorry. I just meant that like sometimes they'll just say, oh, it's like chicken breast, or they'll just say chicken meat, right? And then they could be sourcing from a really poor supplier, right? Like that's what I mean. So that like I've got no problem with byproducts or meal. I think that if they're sourcing from a good supplier and they're doing raw nutrient testing, I think you're fine. Yeah.
Interesting. Amazing. Love that. That. Amazing. Another one that you're going to laugh at. Not laugh at, but it's a controversial one as well. But that's what people are asking. So are grain-free diets better for my dog?
Yeah, this is really controversial. Yeah. I personally, I have no problem with including high quality, like again, if they're sourcing high quality grains into the product. I don't think that they're fillers, because I think filler is something that would have no nutrients in it. And if you actually look at a nutrient analysis, like per 100 grams of rice or corn, they can be quite nutrient rich, right? So I think that I have no problem with grain. Like my dog's on a grain inclusive diet. I can understand why people don't want to feed grain, but yeah, I think that they can contribute to meeting the nutrient requirements, right? So
yeah. And as long as he's still complete and balanced.
Yeah, I think that I think kind of also helps with the pricing of a lot of products, because sometimes meat's more expensive than grain. And so I think that that's not something that people necessarily consider. And, as long as your dog's going to eat it, I think that you're okay. Yeah. Yeah. Like, I wouldn't necessarily recommend just like a complete grain diet. Like, obviously I would like some meat product in it, but yeah, I've got no problem with grain at all. But I can sympathize or empathize with people who don't want to feed grain.
Yeah.
So like I am okay if I have a client who doesn't want to feed grain. I'm okay with helping them find a grain-free diet, as long as the company's reputable and, is actually like taking the extra step to make sure that they're meeting all the requirements without grain. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. It's
Yeah.
your opinion, right? That's why
Yes.
we're doing this. And this is what I love to hear. It's just like a different opinion from different experts, from different experiences. It's
Yeah.
really interesting. As long as there isn't anything scientific that is telling us grain-free diets are better or
Yeah.
really bad, we
Yeah.
can't really make that decision. It's like
Yeah.
our dogs are thriving, they're happy. Yeah, I
Yeah.
get
So
it.
like for example, there are some times where I would 100% recommend like a grain diet is like
Yeah.
if your dog, so say you have a working dog that's like doing like sprinting or something, I'd be like, you know what?
Mhm.
I wouldn't recommend not having grain. I would recommend carbohydrates, because then they can break down and get the energy a lot faster, right? Like that, for example, is a time when I'd be like, you know what? No, I really think you do need grain. But if you're just like having a regular dog, I think you'd
Yeah.
be okay. Yeah. Or if your
Yeah.
dog's like really like overweight, then I would definitely recommend like having grain or like a high fiber diet. So you kind of have to consider the whole picture, instead of just like there's never going to be just a blanket answer like no grain or yes grain. You have to, every dog, like I said earlier, is different. Yeah.
It's different. Yeah. And this is why it's so difficult, I think, as well, because it's not one size fit all. It's the same as with us humans,
Yeah.
isn't it? It's like you might be allergic to gluten, might be
Yeah.
allergic to dairy, and it's really easy for us to identify, a lot harder for dogs to identify. So this is, I think, why as well there is so many allergies, so many of the environmental, is the food, is this and that. It's just more difficult to kind of
Yeah.
like evaluate what's wrong with them, because they can't talk to us, they can't tell us
Yeah.
when they're sick,
Yeah, exactly.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Amazing. So third question, really Google this one, is what is the best dog food for my dog's age?
For your dog's age?
Yeah, like a senior versus a puppy versus a adult. I mean, adult, I guess, who really Googles this question is maybe
Yeah.
like people that are just getting a puppy,
Yeah.
or they are moving into the senior.
Yeah. So I think it depends on the breed. So like under 2 years old for giant breeds, like you need to feed a puppy food. And I generally recommend a company that does complete the AFCO digestibility trials when you're feeding puppy food, just to start with. Like they can switch to another company if they're not, when they're older, but just because those tend to be the companies that are contributing to the research and sort of have a more in-depth understanding of the importance of nutrition for puppies, right? Because you don't want to mess up the nutrients or play with the nutrients too much when you're a puppy, right? Because they're growing and there's a lot going on in their body, right? So, and I have some people come to me that have puppies and they want to feed homemade, and I generally kind of want to wait till the dog, if they can't promise me that they're going to 100% stick with the diet, or they're not going to like drift, if they're going to drift from the diet, then I say, you know what, you're better off feeding a kibble just for this short period of time until you can, get a hold on not drifting from the diet, because you don't want to mess with the nutrients too much. So I think as an adult dog, there's a lot more opportunities to feed all different types of kibble. But I think with a puppy, I'm more comfortable feeding with or recommending a company that does a lot of back research and stuff. Yeah, especially in puppies, just because they're so young and you don't want to cause like damage that's lifelong, right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
and then senior, right?
Yes, yeah. And senior, like I said earlier, that since there is no actual like legal requirement for a senior life stage, there are some senior feeds out there, but they're not necessarily like evidence based, but there is some evidence now that suggests that certain, nutrients are important. So if your dog really is experiencing a lot of like joint health problems, there are certain diets that you can put them on as a senior and stuff. So yeah, it sort of depends on the situation. It depends on the breed as well, because dogs kind of age at different rates, and I think that's what makes it so complicated as well, trying to decide what to feed your dog. Yeah.
Yeah, the lack of research versus
Yes.
the need of the dog and what they're telling you and how they're feeling and things like that. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, and
But let's hope that's going to change.
it's such a diverse species as well. Like there's so many different phenotypes, and since they age so differently, like tiny dogs tend to live a lot longer, right? And they grow up, they enter adulthood a lot faster than giant dogs, and then giant dogs don't live as long. So then it's a point of understanding, when does the dog actually become a senior, and when's the dog actually an adult, and when's their midlife and stuff. Yeah, I think that's actually like really cool, understanding the aging of the dog and how nutrition can change throughout the age. And I think that's why it's kind of difficult to get solid research on it, is because there's so many different breeds and they all age so differently. Yeah.
And health conditions, right? Like 9 years old cavy with heart problem versus an adult cavy that is perfectly healthy, right? Or like cockapoo that is itching. Yeah, there are so many different variations, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that's why it's exciting to see that there is some kind of research happening about it, because I think it's so important to say, what can we do to give them a few more years of their life?
Yeah. And before, like, I know a lot of early research used to just use beagles, because beagles are the easiest dogs to use in the lab, because they're really nice dogs, right? Like they're very friendly,
they love to eat as well.
Yeah. And they're easy to kind of handle because they're small. And then they sort of got into like Labradors, because Labradors also want to eat and they're very friendly. But those studies are, like dog breeds aren't totally different, where if you, test on a beagle, you can't apply it to everybody. Like there still is a lot of similarity. But I think it's cool when you start getting into studies where they actually use a bunch of different like breeds, because technically that's more generalizable and you can apply that to a greater population. And I like seeing studies like that. I think that's really cool, especially when they start using like totally random breeds, or they'll include like mixes and stuff, or they'll call them like super mutts and stuff. I think that's really cool. Like seeing research kind of be more like you can apply that to like the whole population. Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that's awesome.
It's like they still come from wolves, right? But they have different genetics, right? They're not, they don't look the same, like Chihuahua versus a Great Dane,
No,
and I'm sure,
like on paper, they're the same species, but they're totally different phenotype.
Yeah. And this is why I say, sometimes people compare too much the ancestors and how they need to eat versus now. Things change, things have developed, and the world that we live in is different than what they were living in. So I completely agree. Thank you for that. That's a really great answer. Just as we close, if I'm a dog owners who absolutely loved this podcast and loved hearing you and loved your advice, where can they find you?
They can find me at Nibble_Nutrition on Instagram, and then www.nibblenutrition.ca. Yeah, that's where I am.
Amazing. And you do offer consultations as well, right?
Yes. Yeah, I do virtual consultations, and then I also do consultations within Southern Ontario.
Amazing. Brilliant. Amazing. Perfect. I will put the link of that in the show notes. Look, thank you so much, Mikaela, for joining us.
No worries.
I'm sure the guests will just get so much value from this episode. I think it's such a hot topic, and I think it's so good to hear your view about it. So thank you again.
Yeah, no worries. I'm excited. And it's a very exciting topic, and I'm glad that there are a lot of people interested in nutrition. It's just them kind of trying to find real information is hard. And, I'm glad to do this sort of stuff. I think it's a lot of fun. Yeah. I love science communication as well, kind of helping people understand science. Yeah.
And people really love science right now, because they're starting to understand why that is so important, and link it back to, in general, dog health and nutrition. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for listening to our guest, and we will see you on the next episode.
Thank you for watching. If you found this episode helpful, follow us on Instagram. And if you want first access to DAFY, join our waitlist now. The links are in the show notes.